The morning mist hung thick over the Russian forest when the ships appeared in Earth's sky. They came without warning. Massive metal beasts that blotted out the sun. The Valdorian Empire had found another world to conquer. Admiral Kextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking down at the blue and green planet below. His forearms crossed behind his back as he studied the readings on his screen. This world seemed primitive. No space defenses. No energy shields around their cities. It would be an easy victory. Begin the bombardment, he ordered. His voice was cold and sharp. Target the forested regions first. Clear the land for our settlements. The weapons charged with a high whine, plasma cannons turned toward Earth like hungry eyes. The first barrage lit up the darkness of space with deadly light. Far below, in a small cottage deep in the Siberian woods, Anya Volkov was making tea. She was 22 years old, with dark hair and green eyes that seemed older than her face. The cottage was strange. It stood on chicken legs that sometimes moved when no one was looking. Most people stayed away from this place. They whispered stories about the woman who lived here, stories about her mother. Anya's mother was not home. She had gone to visit the spaces between worlds, as she often did. This left Anya alone with her books and her thoughts. She did not know that death was falling from the sky. The plasma bolt hit the cottage like a hammer of fire. The ancient wood exploded. The chicken legs cracked and fell. Anya was thrown against the wall as her world turned to flames and pain. A piece of burning metal sliced across her face. Another crushed her left leg. She tried to scream, but smoke filled her lungs. Through the pain, she heard voices, strange voices speaking in a language she did not know. Light surrounded her. Not the light of fire, but something else. Something that pulled at her body. "Life sign detected," said a voice in the Valdorian language, bringing the native aboard for questioning. Anya felt herself rising, her broken body lifting through the air. The world spun around her as she was pulled up through the clouds, up toward the metal ships that had destroyed her home. Pain made everything dim. She closed her eyes and felt herself falling into darkness. When the transport beam finished, Anya lay on a metal table in the medical bay of the Valdorian flagship. Tubes and wires connected to her body. Machines beeped and hummed around her. The alien doctors worked to keep her alive. They wanted information from this primitive creature. "Curious," said Dr. Vexthol, examining his readings. "Her cellular structure is more complex than expected. And these energy patterns," and he paused. "I have never seen anything like this." Admiral Kextar entered the medical bay. He looked down at the unconscious human girl with disgust. "When will she wake? The Emperor wants to know what defenses this planet has." "Soon," the doctor replied. "But Admiral, I must report something strange. Since we brought her aboard, our systems have been acting oddly. Small glitches. Nothing serious, but—" "I do not care about glitches," Kextar snapped. "Wake her up. We have a schedule to keep." But even as he spoke, the lights in the medical bay flickered. For just a moment, the shadows in the corners seemed to move by themselves. A cold wind blew through the room, though that should have been impossible on a spaceship. Dr. Vexthol shivered. "Admiral, perhaps we should be more careful. This planet, the energy readings we detected before the attack. What if they were not natural formations? What if they were something else?" Kextar turned his cold gaze on the doctor. "Are you suggesting that these primitives have power? Look at her." He pointed at Anya's still form. "One blast from our weakest weapon and she nearly died. These humans are nothing." As if responding to his words, Anya's eyes opened. They were green like deep forest pools. She said nothing. She simply looked at the creatures standing around her. Her gaze moved from face to face, studying them. "Finally," Kextar said. He activated his translator device. "Human, you will answer our questions. What weapons does your planet have? How many cities? Where are your leaders?" Anya tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. "Isu, hurt me. Answer the questions," Kextar shouted. Anya closed her eyes. A single tear rolled down her scarred cheek. "You should not have hurt me," she whispered. "Mother will be very angry," the Admiral laughed. "Your mother? Is she a warrior? Does she command armies?" "She commands older things," Anya said softly. "Much older things." As she spoke, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The medical machines began showing impossible readings. In the walls, something that sounded like whispers began to echo. The Valdorian crew looked around nervously. "Enough," Kextar snapped. "Doctor, sedate her. We will try again when she is more cooperative." But before Dr. Vexthul could reach for his sedative, every light on the ship went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red light. Throughout the ship, alarms began to sound. "Bridge to Admiral," came a panicked voice over the comm. "Sir, we have a problem. Our navigation systems, they show we are still orbiting Earth, but the planet looks different. And sir, we cannot engage our hyperspace engines. Something is preventing us from leaving." Kekstar's 4 hands clenched into fists. "What do you mean we cannot leave?" "The engines start up fine, sir, but when we try to jump to hyperspace, nothing happens. It is as if something is holding us here." In the medical bay, Anya smiled for the first time since waking up. It was not a pleasant smile. "I told you," she whispered. "Mother will be very angry." Far below, in the space where her cottage had once stood, the burned chicken legs began to twitch. The scattered ashes started to swirl in patterns that hurt to look at. And in the space between spaces, something ancient and terrible felt the pain of her daughter and began to move. The Valdorian Empire had made many mistakes in their long history of conquest. They had fought species with advanced technology. They had battled creatures with natural weapons and armor. They had defeated civilizations that had ruled for thousands of years, but they had never hurt a witch's daughter. They had never faced a mother's rage. In his quarters, Admiral Kekstar stared out at the Earth below and felt, for the first time in his life, a cold touch of fear. The planet looked the same, but something was different. Something was wrong. The space around his ship felt thick, as if they were trapped in amber. He thought about the girl's words. About older things. About mothers and anger. Outside his window, stars that had shone for billions of years began to flicker and dim. And in the darkness between them, something with iron teeth and eyes like burning coals began to hunt. Baba Yaga felt the pain like a knife through her heart. She was visiting the place where lost dreams go to die when it happened. One moment she was walking through fields of forgotten wishes. The next she was screaming with rage that shook the foundations of reality. Her iron teeth gnashed together. Her bone legs scraped against nothing and everything. Someone had hurt her daughter. Someone would pay. Baba Yaga had existed since before the first star learned to burn. She had tested heroes and killed monsters. She had watched civilizations rise and fall like waves on a beach. But nothing in all her long existence had ever made her this angry. She stepped sideways through space and appeared where her cottage had stood. The burned remains lay scattered across the forest floor. The chicken legs were cracked and bleeding. Her mortar and pestle, ancient beyond measure, lay broken in pieces. But it was not the cottage that made her rage burn hotter. It was the taste of her daughter's blood in the air, the smell of her pain, the echo of her fear. Baba Yaga looked up at the metal ships hanging in the sky like ugly scars against the blue. Her eyes blazed with fire that had burned since the world was young. "You took my daughter," she whispered to the ships above. "You hurt my child." Her voice carried further than it should have. It traveled through space, through dimensions, through the spaces between thoughts. Every Valdorian ship in Earth's orbit heard it. The words came through their comm systems, their computers, their dreams. "Now you are mine." Admiral Kekstar stood on his bridge, watching his crew run back and forth in panic. Reports were coming in from all over the ship. Strange things were happening. Equipment was breaking for no reason. Crew members were having nightmares while awake. Some claimed to see an old woman in the corridors, but when they looked directly at her, she was gone. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we are receiving messages from the rest of the fleet. They report similar problems. And, sir, we just lost contact with 3 ships completely." "What do you mean, lost contact?" Kekstar demanded. "They were there one moment, then gone the next. No explosion, no debris. They just vanished." On the view screen, Earth turned slowly below them. But something was wrong with the planet now. The clouds moved in patterns that hurt to look at. The oceans seemed deeper than they should be. And sometimes, for just a moment, there seemed to be a second moon in the sky, a moon made of bone and shadow. "Admiral," called out the science officer, "you need to see this. Our sensors are picking up impossible readings from the planet's surface. Energy signatures that should not exist. And, sir, there appears to be a structure in orbit that was not there before." "Show me," Kekstar ordered. The main screen changed to show a magnified view of space near Earth. There, floating among the stars like it belonged there, was a cottage. But this cottage was wrong in every way. It stood on chicken legs that walked through vacuum as if it were solid ground. Smoke rose from its chimney in defiance of physics, and around it space itself seemed to bend and twist. "This is impossible," Kextar breathed. "Sir," the communications officer said, his voice shaking, "we are receiving a transmission from that structure. Put it through." The screen filled with the image of an old woman. Her hair was white as bone. Her teeth were iron. Her eyes burned with fires older than civilization. When she spoke, her voice was like the grinding of continents. "I am Baba Yaga," she said. "You have taken something that belongs to me. You have hurt something I love." This was a mistake. Kextar tried to project authority, but his voice cracked slightly. "I am Admiral Kextar of the Valdorian Empire. You will return our prisoner and submit to Imperial authority." Baba Yaga laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was the sound of tombstones cracking and children's nightmares coming true. "Your prisoner," she said. "Oh, little Admiral. You understand nothing. She is not your prisoner. You are hers. You are all mine now. We have the most powerful fleet in the galaxy," Kextar said. "Your primitive magic cannot stand against our technology." "Magic?" Baba Yaga tilted her head like a curious bird. "Is that what you call it? How quaint." She leaned forward and her face filled the screen. "Let me show you what I call it." The transmission ended. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screaming started. It began in the lower decks. Crew members reported seeing things that could not be there. Dead relatives walking the corridors. Childhood fears made real. Some spoke of a house with chicken legs that appeared in empty rooms. Others claimed that the ship's walls had turned to gingerbread and bones. "Medical teams to all decks," Kextar ordered. Mass hallucination. Some kind of gas or mind weapon. But even as he spoke, he knew it was not gas. It was not a weapon he understood. It was something older and more terrible than his empire had ever faced. On other ships throughout the fleet, similar reports came in. But these were not just hallucinations. Crew members were aging decades in minutes. Others were transforming into animals. Some simply vanished, leaving only the echo of laughter behind. In his private quarters, Captain Dexmore of the battleship Conqueror was filing a report when his door opened. A young human girl walked in. She looked perhaps 8 years old, with pigtails and a sweet smile. She should not have been able to breathe in space. She should not have been able to walk through the ship's shields. "Hello," she said in perfect Valdorian. "I am here to give you a test." Captain Dexmore reached for his weapon, but his hand would not move. What are you?" "I am what your daughter might have been," the girl said. "If you had not spent your life conquering and killing, if you had stayed home and told her bedtime stories instead of burning other people's homes." The captain tried to scream for help, but no sound came out. "Now," the girl said, her sweet smile never wavering, "let me tell you a story. Once upon a time there was a bad man who hurt children. Would you like to know how that story ends?" Throughout the Valdorian fleet, similar scenes played out. Old women appeared in engine rooms and turned fusion reactors into ovens that baked bread. Children showed up in weapons bays and turned plasma cannons into toys that shot soap bubbles. The Empire's most advanced technology became useless in the face of stories and dreams made real. On the medical bay of the flagship, Anya opened her eyes again. The machines around her showed readings that made no sense. Her broken leg was healing at an impossible rate. The scars on her face were fading. "Impossible," Dr. Vexthol whispered. "Her cellular regeneration has increased by a factor of Doctor," Anya said softly. "Do you have children?" The Valdorian medic nodded numbly. "2 sons. Back on the homeworld, do you love them?" "Of course." Anya sat up on the medical table. The tubes and wires fell away from her skin like old spider webs. "Then you understand why Mother is angry." Outside the medical bay, the ship's lights began to flicker in a pattern like a heartbeat. And in the space between the flickers, shadows moved with purpose and ancient hunger. The Valdorian Empire was about to learn why some things should never be touched, why some daughters should never be harmed, why some mothers should never be crossed. On Earth below, something was awakening in the humans. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in her laboratory in Beijing when the first reports came in. Alien ships in the sky, attacks from space. She was reaching for the emergency phone when she froze. A memory that was not her memory flooded her mind. She remembered being 7 years old reading fairy tales by candlelight. But it was not her memory. It belonged to her grandmother, and her grandmother's grandmother, going back through generations, all the way back to the first humans who had faced the impossible and lived to tell about it. The knowledge came like a flood. How to walk without making sound, how to see things that hide in shadows, how to speak words that carry power. These were not skills she had learned. They were skills her people had always carried, sleeping in their blood until the moment they were needed. Across the world, 6 billion humans suddenly remembered what they truly were. In London, Professor James Wright was teaching a class about folklore when the bombing started. His students looked to him in panic, but instead of fear, he felt something else. A cold certainty, a knowing that came from bones older than civilization. "Children," he said calmly, "today you will learn why humans tell stories about monsters. It is because we have always known that one day the monsters would come for us." He walked to his desk and opened a drawer. Inside was a knife that had been in his family for generations. He had never understood why his grandfather had given it to him. Now he knew. The blade hummed with purpose as he lifted it. And we have always known how to fight back. The Valdorian ground forces had landed in 12 major cities. They expected easy victories against primitive humans. What they found instead was impossible. In New York, a squad of Valdorian soldiers cornered a group of humans in an alley. The aliens raised their plasma rifles, confident in their superior firepower. But as they prepared to fire, an old woman stepped out of the shadows. She was nobody special. Just a grandmother who sold flowers on the corner. But when she looked at the aliens, they saw something in her eyes that made their blood freeze. She began to speak in a language that predated their species. Words that had been old when their son was young. The soldiers tried to pull their triggers, but their weapons had turned to dust in their hands. The grandmother smiled and continued speaking. The aliens began to age. Their scales withered. Their eyes clouded. In seconds, they crumbled to ash that blew away on the wind. "Some things," the old woman said to the frightened humans behind her, "are older than technology." Similar scenes played out across the globe. In Moscow, children played games that made Valdorian vehicles break down. In Tokyo, businessmen spoke ancient words that turned alien weapons into origami cranes. In Cairo, mothers sang lullabies that put entire platoons of invaders to sleep forever. The humans were not using technology. They were using something deeper. Something that lived in the spaces between heartbeats and in the pause between words. They were using the power that had always lived in their stories. On the Valdorian flagship, Admiral Kextar watched the reports with growing horror. His ground forces were not just losing. They were disappearing. Entire units would go silent, then be found transformed into trees or stones, or sometimes not found at all. "This is impossible," he said for the 100th time. "They are primitives. They have no advanced weapons." "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we have lost contact with landing parties in 17 cities. The remaining forces are requesting immediate evacuation." "Denied," Kextar snarled. "We do not retreat from primitives." But even as he spoke, he could feel his confidence cracking. The ship itself seemed wrong now. Corridors led to places they should not go. Elevators opened onto rooms that did not exist. And always there was the sound of an old woman laughing somewhere just out of sight. In the medical bay, Anya was standing. Her leg was fully healed. The scars on her face had faded to thin silver lines that looked almost decorative. She moved through the ship like she owned it, and in a way she did. Dr. Vexthal followed her nervously. "Where are you going?" "You should remain in medical for observation." "I am going to find my mother," Anya said simply. "She is here." "That is impossible. This is a sealed vessel in space." Anya stopped and looked at him with those green eyes that seemed to hold forests and secrets. "Doctor, you keep saying things are impossible. But here I am, walking through your ship after your weapons should have killed me. Here is my mother doing things your science cannot explain. Perhaps," she said gently, "your definition of impossible is too small." They walked through corridors that seemed to stretch further than they should. Other crew members they passed looked at Anya with fear and confusion. Some tried to stop her, but their hands passed through her like she was made of mist. Others found their feet rooted to the floor, unable to move until she had passed. "How are you doing this?" Dr. Vexthal whispered. "I am not doing anything," Anya replied. "The ship is. It knows what I am now. It remembers what my mother taught it about hospitality." They reached the main corridor that led to the bridge, but instead of a hallway, they found a forest path. Ancient trees grew from the metal floor. Sunlight filtered down through leaves that should not exist. Birds sang in branches that reached toward artificial stars. "Welcome to my mother's house," Anya said. At the end of the path stood a cottage. It was the same cottage that had been destroyed, but also different. Larger, older, more real than the ship around it. It stood on chicken legs that scratched at the metal deck and left marks like claw prints. Smoke rose from the chimney. Light glowed warm and yellow in the windows, and from inside came the sound of someone humming an old song. "She is baking," Anya said with a smile. "Mother always bakes when she is thinking about punishment." On the bridge, Admiral Kextar stared at his screens in disbelief. Half his sensors showed the normal corridor outside the bridge. The other half showed a forest that could not exist. Some showed both at the same time, overlapping like double-exposed photographs. "Sir," his science officer called out, "I am reading massive space-time distortions throughout the ship. Reality itself seems to be shifting." "That is not possible," Kextar said automatically. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted, "we are receiving another transmission from the cottage. Put it through." Baba Yaga appeared on the screen. But now she was in her kitchen, mixing something in a large bowl. She looked up at the camera and smiled. Her iron teeth gleamed. "Admiral," she said pleasantly, "I hope you have been enjoying your stay. I wanted to let you know that dinner will be ready soon." "What are you talking about?" Kexter demanded. "Oh, you will see," Baba Yaga said. "I am making something special. A recipe passed down through generations. It is called justice, and it has been cooking for a very long time." She held up the bowl so he could see inside. But instead of food, Kextar saw swirling images. His empire's ships scattered across the galaxy, all experiencing impossible things. His soldiers on Earth transforming into cautionary tales. His home planet, where children had begun disappearing from their beds, only to return speaking of lessons learned from an iron-toothed woman. "You see," Baba Yaga continued, "when you hurt my daughter, you did not just attack one girl. You attacked the daughter of story itself. The child of every tale told around every fire since humans first learned to speak. And now," her smile grew wider, "those stories are coming home." The transmission ended. On the bridge, alarms began to sound. But these were not normal alarms. They played children's songs, lullabies, the kinds of melodies that mothers hummed to their babies in the dark. Admiral Kextar realized, with a cold certainty that settled in his bones, that his empire had not invaded a primitive planet. They had walked into a fairy tale, and everyone knew how fairy tales ended for the monsters. King Valdorius arrived in Earth's orbit aboard the Eternal Dominion, the largest warship ever built. 5 miles long and bristling with weapons that could crack planets, it was the pride of the Empire. The king had come personally to deal with what his admirals called a minor colonial uprising. He was not prepared for what he found. "Your Majesty," Admiral Kextar's voice crackled over the comm from his trapped flagship. "I must advise extreme caution. This world is not what we thought. The natives possess abilities that—" "Silence," King Valdorius commanded. He was a massive creature, even by Valdorian standards. His scales were black as space, his forearms ended in claws that could crush steel. He had conquered 47 star systems and had never known defeat. "I will not be lectured about primitives by an admiral who cannot handle one damaged planet." He turned to his weapons officer. "Target all population centers. Maximum yield. We will burn this world clean and start fresh." "Yes, Your Majesty," the officer replied. "Charging planet-killer weapons now." But as the massive guns began to power up, something impossible happened. Space itself began to change around the Eternal Dominion. Stars that had been distant points of light suddenly seemed close enough to touch. The blackness between them took on texture, like old fabric worn thin. And then, as if it had always been there, Baba Yaga's cottage appeared directly in front of the dreadnought. It was impossible, of course. The cottage was maybe 20 feet wide. The Eternal Dominion was 5 miles long. But somehow the tiny building filled the entire view screen. It loomed over the massive warship like a giant looking down at an ant. "Impossible," King Valdorius breathed. "No structure can exist in space without support systems. No building can be larger than its dimensions." On the bridge screen, smoke rose from the cottage chimney in defiance of vacuum. Light glowed warm in the windows. The chicken leg scratched at nothingness and left marks in space itself. "Your Majesty," the science officer reported, "our sensors cannot make sense of what we are seeing. The structure appears to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It is both 20 feet wide and infinite in size." "Nonsense," the king snarled. "All weapons fire at will. Destroy that thing." The Eternal Dominion unleashed its fury. Planet-killer beams lanced out toward the cottage. Missiles that could level cities streaked through space. The combined firepower was enough to destroy entire star systems. Every single shot missed. Not because the cottage moved. It never moved at all. But somehow the weapons fired around it. Energy beams curved away like water flowing around a stone. Missiles turned into birds mid-flight and flew away singing. One massive projectile transformed into a rooster that landed on the cottage roof and began to crow. King Valdorius watched his ultimate weapons turn into a farmyard menagerie and felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt. "Perhaps," came a voice from everywhere and nowhere. "We should have a conversation." The front door of the cottage opened. Baba Yaga stepped out, but she was not the same as before. In space, surrounded by stars, she was revealed as what she truly was. Ancient beyond measure, vast beyond understanding. Her form shifted and flowed like smoke, sometimes appearing as an old woman, sometimes as a force of nature itself. "King Valdorius," she said, and her voice carried across the vacuum as if space were air. "We meet at last, and what are you?" the king demanded. "I am the woman in the woods who tests heroes," Baba Yaga replied. "I am the voice that speaks in cautionary tales. I am what waits in the dark for those who abuse their power." She smiled, and her iron teeth caught the light of distant stars. "I am what your mother should have told you stories about." "You are nothing," King Valdorius snarled. "A primitive witch with primitive tricks. I rule an empire that spans 12 systems. I command fleets that number in the thousands." "Yes," Baba Yaga agreed. "You have built something very impressive. But tell me, King, what stories do your subjects tell about you?" The question hung in space between them. King Valdorius felt uneasy, though he could not say why. "They tell stories of my victories. My conquests." "Ah," Baba Yaga said sadly. "But those are not the stories I mean. I mean the stories they tell their children in whispers. The stories they think you do not hear. What do those stories say about kings who take what they want and destroy what they cannot use?" King Valdorius said nothing. He knew those stories. Every tyrant knew those stories. "I thought so," Baba Yaga continued. "Well then, let me tell you how those stories end." She raised one hand, and suddenly the space around them was filled with images, not on screens, but hanging in the void like ghosts made of light. They showed the Valdorian Empire, but not as the king saw it. They showed worlds where children hid from soldiers, cities where families wept for the dead, planets stripped bare to feed the Empire's hunger. "This is what you built," Baba Yaga said. "This is the legacy you carved across the stars. Pain and fear and the tears of mothers who lost their children to your ambition. I built order," King Valdorius protested. "I brought civilization to barbarian worlds." "You brought death," Baba Yaga corrected gently. "Just as you brought death to my daughter's home. Just as you tried to bring death to my daughter." The images changed. Now they showed Anya, lying broken in the ruins of her cottage. They showed her blood on the forest floor. They showed her pain. "So now," Baba Yaga said, "the stories are coming home. All of them. Every tale ever told about tyrants and the price they pay. Every warning about power without wisdom. Every promise that justice will come for those who harm the innocent." King Valdorius felt cold fear creeping up his spine. "You cannot threaten me. I have the largest fleet in the galaxy." "Do you?" Baba Yaga asked. King Valdorius turned to his tactical officer. "Report on fleet status." The officer's hands shook as he read his instruments. "Your Majesty, I show only 12 ships remaining in the system. The rest are gone." "What do you mean gone?" "Not destroyed, Your Majesty, simply no longer there." As if they never existed, Baba Yaga nodded approvingly. "Stories have their own logic, King. In stories, evil armies do not get to keep their full strength when facing justice. That would make for a poor tale." She stepped closer to her cottage door, and as she moved, she seemed to grow larger, or perhaps the Eternal Dominion was shrinking. Reality bent around her like heated metal. "I will make you an offer," she said. "The same offer I have made to every tyrant, every bully, every creature that mistakes cruelty for strength. Answer 3 riddles and I will let you go. Fail, and face the consequences that have waited for you since you first chose power over compassion. King Valdorius laughed, though it sounded forced even to his own ears. Riddles? You think to defeat the Valdorian Empire with word games? Not word games, Baba Yaga said. Truth games, the kind of truth that tyrants spend their lives avoiding. She held up one finger. First riddle. What is the difference between a king and a bandit? King Valdorius opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. The question seemed simple, but as he thought about it, he realized he did not know. What was the difference? Both took what they wanted by force. Both ruled through fear, he began, then stopped. No answer? Baba Yaga asked. Then let me give you the answer. A king serves his people. A bandit serves only himself. Which are you, King Valdorius? The king said nothing. Second riddle. Baba Yaga continued, holding up a second finger. What is the strongest power in the universe? This time King Valdorius was confident. Military might. Superior weapons. The ability to destroy your enemies. Baba Yaga shook her head. Wrong again. The strongest power is love. The love of a parent for a child. The love that makes ordinary people do extraordinary things. The love that you have never understood. King Valdorius felt his confidence cracking. That is not power. That is weakness, is it? Baba Yaga asked. Then why are you here? Why did your invasion fail? Because a mother loved her daughter enough to move between worlds to protect her. She held up a third finger. Final riddle. What happens to tyrants at the end of every story? King Valdorius knew the answer to this one. He had always known it. Every tyrant knew it deep in their heart, but he could not say it out loud. They fall, Baba Yaga said softly. They always fall. Not because heroes are stronger, but because stories demand justice. Because the universe itself has a sense of balance that cannot be denied forever. She stepped back into her cottage. You have failed all three riddles, King Valdorius, and now the oldest story of all must play out to its end. The cottage door closed with a sound like thunder, and in the command throne of the eternal dominion, King Valdorius felt something cold and sharp slide between his neck and his head. King Valdorius did not scream when he died. There was no dramatic explosion. No grand speech, no final battle. One moment he was sitting on his command throne, trying to process Baba Yaga's riddles. The next moment his head simply rolled off his shoulders and hit the deck with a wet thud. The bridge fell silent. No one had seen a weapon. No one had seen an attack. The king had simply ended. As if the universe itself had decided he was no longer allowed to exist. Medical team to the bridge, someone whispered. But even as the words left their mouth, they knew it was pointless. Dead was dead, and dead was what King Valdorius was now. Admiral Kextar's voice crackled over the comm system. Eternal Dominion, report your status. We detected massive energy fluctuations from your position. The crew looked at each other. Who was in command now? The king was dead? The chain of succession was unclear, and outside their ship, a cottage that should not exist continued to float in space. Smoke rising from its impossible chimney. This is Commander Thexai, the first officer finally replied. The king is dead. Silence filled the comm channel. Then Kextar's voice, smaller now, almost broken. How? Thexai looked down at the headless body on the command throne. We do not know. He just died. But across the galaxy, the Valdorian Empire knew exactly how their king had died. They felt it in their bones, in their blood, in the deepest parts of their minds where stories live. Justice had come calling, as it always did in the end. The tyrant king was dead, and his empire was dying with him. On Valdor Prime, the capital world, something strange was happening. The massive statues of King Valdorius began to crumble, not from attack or sabotage, but from age that came all at once. Centuries of wear and weather happened in minutes. The bronze turned green, then black, then crumbled to dust that blew away on the wind. In the government buildings, officials found themselves unable to give orders. Not because they had lost their voices, but because no one would listen anymore. The fear that had held the empire together was gone, replaced by something else, something that sounded like children laughing and old women humming lullabies. General Vexkar, the highest-ranking military officer left alive, tried to rally the remaining fleets. He activated the emergency protocols, sent out calls for all ships to converge on Earth and finish what the king had started. But when he gave the order to attack, his weapons officers simply shook their heads. We cannot, General, they said. The weapons will not fire. What do you mean they will not fire? We can target. We can lock on. But when we pull the triggers, nothing happens. It is as if the weapons have forgotten how to kill. General Vexcar ran to the weapon controls himself. He pressed every button, pulled every trigger. The weapons hummed with power, but no shots came out. Instead, the gun ports began to bloom with flowers. Beautiful, impossible flowers that should not have been able to grow in the vacuum of space. On Earth, Anya walked through the Valdorian flagship as if she owned it. Which, in a way, she now did. The crew she passed no longer tried to stop her. They could not look directly at her anymore. When they tried, they saw not a young woman, but something else. Something that reminded them of their own daughters, their own sisters, their own mothers. Something that made them ashamed of what they had done. She found Admiral Kextar on his bridge, staring out at the space where the cottage floated like a dream made real. He looked older than he had hours before. Gray had crept into his scales. His four hands shook slightly. "Admiral," Anya said softly. He turned to face her and she saw tears in his alien eyes. "I did not know," he whispered. "We did not know what you were." "What am I?" Anya asked. Kextar struggled to find words. You are every daughter, every child we have hurt in our conquests, every innocent life we destroyed because we thought might made right." His voice broke. "You are our judgment." Anya nodded sadly. "Yes, but I am also mercy. Mother wanted to kill you all, to make you suffer as I suffered. But I asked her not to. Why? Because you have children too. I can see them in your mind. Your son who builds toy spaceships, your daughter who asks why you have to go away so often." Anya smiled, and for a moment she looked like any young woman. They should not lose their father because their father lost his way. Admiral Kextar fell to his knees. "What happens to us now?" "Now you go home," Anya said. "Your empire is finished." "Not because Mother destroyed it, but because empires built on fear cannot stand once the fear is gone. Your people will remember what it was like before you conquered them. They will remember their own stories, their own strength." She walked to the view screen and looked out at Earth below. "And you will remember too. Every night when you try to sleep, you will remember the cottage you destroyed. You will remember the girl you hurt. You will remember that for one moment in your life, you had the chance to choose kindness over cruelty. And you chose wrong." The Admiral bowed his head. "Is there no forgiveness?" "There is," Anya said. "But forgiveness must be earned. Go home, Admiral. Spend the rest of your life protecting children instead of hurting them. Teach your son that strength comes from helping the weak, not conquering them. Show your daughter that real power is the power to choose mercy." She turned to face him one last time. "Do this, and perhaps one day the nightmares will stop." When Anya left the bridge, Admiral Kextar was alone with his thoughts and his shame. Outside, Baba Yaga's cottage began to fade like morning mist. The forest path through the ship's corridors withered and disappeared. The impossible things became possible again, and the possible became ordinary. But the memory remained. The knowledge that somewhere in the universe, in a small cottage in an ancient forest, lived a mother who would move heaven and earth to protect her daughter, and that daughter, scarred but unbroken, who had chosen mercy over revenge. The surviving Valdorian ships began their journey home. They flew in silence, their weapons filled with flowers, their hearts heavy with the weight of understanding. They had come to conquer a primitive world and instead had discovered something they had forgotten existed: consequences. On Earth, in the ruins of her cottage, Anya sat with her mother. Baba Yaga had returned to her normal size, looking like nothing more than an old woman with iron teeth and eyes that held starlight. "You were merciful," Baba Yaga said, "more merciful than they deserved." "They were afraid," Anya replied. "Fear makes people do terrible things, but it also makes them capable of change." Baba Yaga smiled and stroked her daughter's hair. "When did you become so wise?" "I learned from the best teacher," Anya said, leaning against her mother's shoulder. "You showed me that power without wisdom is just destruction, that strength without compassion is just bullying." Around them, the forest began to regrow. Where the cottage had stood, new trees sprouted from the earth. Flowers bloomed in the ashes, and in the distance other humans emerged from their hiding places, changed by their encounter with the impossible. They carried with them new knowledge. Not just that aliens existed, but that Earth was protected, that somewhere in the deep woods lived guardians who remembered the old ways, who knew that some things were more important than conquest or power or empire. They would tell stories about this day, stories about the aliens who learned too late that some daughters should never be harmed, stories about mothers whose love could reshape reality itself, stories about the price of choosing cruelty over kindness. And children listening to these stories would understand, as children always had, that the universe has its own sense of justice, that bullies always fall in the end, that love is stronger than fear, mercy more powerful than weapons, and that sometimes the smallest cottage in the deepest woods holds more real strength than the largest empire in the galaxy. In years to come, when other aliens approached Earth, they would hear these stories. They would learn about Baba Yaga and her daughter. They would understand that this small blue world was under the protection of something older and more terrible than technology. Most would turn away and find other worlds to explore. Worlds where the children had no stories about iron-toothed women who protected the innocent, but a few, the wise ones, would land peacefully. They would come not as conquerors but as guests. And sometimes, if they were very respectful and very careful, they might catch a glimpse of smoke rising from a cottage deep in the Russian woods. A cottage that stood on chicken legs and held within it the promise that some things, no matter how small, would always be protected, no matter how powerful the threat, no matter how vast the empire, no matter what.